For my fourth session of day 3 of South by Southwest, I went to the featured session of Mindfulness Over Perfection, Getting Real on Mental Health, featuring Wonder Mind and Selena Gomez. Based on my notes, I titled them The Language of Listening. The stigma around mental health is construed. We assume that as a society that we are doing better because we are now finally talking about mental health, but I would argue that that's not even the half of it. Being upfront about mental health releases a lot of anxiety and stress on one person, whether you are a verbal processor like me, you work through that through journaling or therapy, but having that realization allows that weight to go off your shoulders. So the entire panel's point was, let's pay attention to the opportunity of being vulnerable with each other as we all work through life with our similar situations. The storm of mental health is not a particular moment. It is a struggle that is lived through every single day. And we are now learning to live life, but also learn to take that with a grain of salt as we do struggle with our mental health disorders, such as living with depression. You may never see it, but everyone is struggling with something. And that was something that all 5 panelists could agree on. And I think within this past year, the way that mental health has been talked about has changed. They touched that they used to be shameful and hide behind their feelings, but now we have more access as a guide to these feelings and putting them in words. And I'm going to backtrack there just for a moment. So 2 men on this panel of Corey Yeager and Solomon Thomas, and they both said that they used to feel like shameful, especially as a male, to have these emotions. And Selena Gomez's mother also spoke on how she has ADHD, and she also lives with anxiety and stress, and she wonders how business partners view them as being unstable due to these disorders. So to have these specifics and how it has affected these people directly was extremely powerful. I think at one point during the seminar, no matter who was in that room, everyone choked back a tear at least once from how powerful this panel was. And to kind of go into that, so I said we used to be shameful of these feelings, but now we're having more access and guides on how to put them into words. We have to be willing to understand each other in order to talk to one another. The biggest thing here that they spent a good chunk of time on is that the language we use with ourselves is almost even more important than the language we use with each other. As humans, we are willing to give one another grace, but rarely do we allow the same grace for ourselves. I know that that is applicable in my life. I think I am very forgiving and free-flowing, but I'm really hard on myself in this regard. So that aligned with me just naturally. I also thought the interesting point is that we have to talk to one another about it and incorporate these conversations just to raise that awareness about it and saying that it's okay to not be okay. And Solomon Thomas was saying I'll walk in the locker room and they'll be what did you do over the weekend? He's I went to therapy and this is how the session goes, and I was nervous to speak at South by Southwest. But by allowing yourself to be vulnerable and have that comfortability of expressing your feelings, it does relieve that stress and pressure because you are able to process it in this regard and work through it, especially not being alone. So he has done a tremendous job of incorporating that and making that a statement of where men or men in sports or young Black men are able to also express this, which I think goes back to that shame and hiding these feelings away. So when someone is confiding in us, moving on, we are so quick to always provide solutions or comfort and be a reliable source for them. But the biggest thing we can do is listen. And that's why I titled my notes, The Language of Listening. How do we make smaller safe spaces among us? That's what I was saying with the Solomon Thomas example here. The smallest impact and normalization of these conversations could save a life. And my overall thoughts here is that this panel absolutely rocked it. They were vulnerable, connected, very in touch with the world, their surroundings, and what's going on, and their audience. They all provided personal examples and struck the audience to the bone. This was beyond well thought out and put together. It is a standout session for South by Southwest. And my biggest standout, as I was so excited to go see Selena Gomez talk about Wonder Mime, but my biggest standout was Solomon Thomas. He plays for the New York Jets, and I didn't think twice about it when I saw his name on the panel. I was wondering how he contributed to like the mental health mission and Wonder Mind overall, as the other panelists like are all active like board advisors for Wonder Mind. And the reason Solomon Thomas stood out to me is because he used his life experiences to make a big impact. And every single time he spoke, every single person's ears perked up because he believes in this mission, and he was beyond vulnerable on stage being able to talk about this. And based on what he has gone through, he definitely struck me the most within this panel, and that's my biggest takeaway, as I was not expecting that, and I didn't know his connection to Wonder Mime. One of the things that he touched on that I'll just end with here is that he said that he had to look at flawed versions of himself, do the work, such as like going to therapy, expressing these feelings, and now he's able to share his experience with others. And the panelists all went through and were asked, like, what was a time where you felt like comfortable like sharing your journey or like sharing your mental health. And I just really enjoyed his answers the most. Like I said, they surprised me. Like I've known like a little bit about like Selena Gomez's background. I knew a little bit about like the doctors on the panel, like in their background, and like Wonder Mine's vision. But Solomon Thomas surprised me the most in this regard. And this, like I said, this panel just absolutely rocked it while breaking the stigma around mental health and having this open and honest conversation.